All right, welcome back. We are COMP397. That's web game programming in the winter 2022 semester at Centennial. And it's week 3, part 2 of our broadcast and recording and session together. And we've just come off of making a simple, silly robot in Blender. Very, very simple with a couple arms and a head and so on. Everything is together, and that's fine. We may take it further another day. But for today, I'm just going to save this robot. We may have another robot that I make some slightly differently on Friday. But either way, we're going to have a couple of enemies that we're going to bring in. And I'm going to make them more complex. One thing we didn't do with this robot, which something that we're going to handle in the future, is maybe what we want to do is make these components, the head and the arms, separate. And what that allows us to do is animate them, move them around, and make them do something as opposed to hang at the sides. For today, it's not important. We're not doing any animation. We're going to keep it very simple. All right, so that's cool. We've done this, the robot, we brought it into Unity. And let's open up Unity and see where we're at. Okay, so we're going to continue to build, right? So again, this is a kind of a class that we do a little bit of everything. So we're going to continue to build here and build capability, I'm hoping, for you guys as well. So here's our robot. We brought him in, and that's the last thing we did before we went on break. That's great, but we don't have any kind of colliders for the robot. So we have a bunch of base materials. That's great. That's fantastic. But we want to have a collider. Let's add in a couple of things. So we don't need a rigid body right now, but we do need a collider. So the typical thing we can do is add a box collider or some kind of capsule collider is also not a bad idea for the robot, right? So if we added a capsule collider, notice that it tries to encompass the entire robot, and we don't have to let it. We can kind of go here and modify the capsule so that it kind of works the way we want. So you can see that there are these little, if you go far enough away or from a different angle, you can see these little edges here. When I kind of click this little edit button, it'll allow me to move one side or the other of the capsule. One thing to also know is that what the capsule is, how the capsule is situated, right? So notice that the capsule is actually in this way. It's kind of done across the y-axis. And what I really wanted to do, if I put it across the x-axis, that's this way. But really, maybe what we need is the z-axis, which is this way. So that we want the capsule to be upward, up and down, as opposed to left and right or forward and back. All right, so that's how we want it to be. It's pretty thin, and let's undo those changes. So let's just undo. So let's switch this to z-axis. That's number one. And the second thing is when we start modifying it, I want it to be modified symmetrically. So if I was to go in here and start modifying the collider, right? So let's click onto it. So notice when I click onto it, you can move it, you can do a bunch of stuff to it, right? That's edit mode, and you can see that there's these little control bars here and at the top, right? What I want is when we click this, I want to press the Alt key at the same time. So if I press the Alt key or the Control key, right, then we should be able to move it symmetrically. So that's the thing, and it should kind of accommodate most of the body, at least part of the body like this. Remember, you can break down the object in as many pieces as you want, many colliders as you want to do. So you can kind of break this down like this, make the body, but then what about the sides, right? And it's kind of weirdly shaped. The other option is if you don't like the capsule collider piece, right? Let's remove. Let's add in other collider types. Like we can explore other types of colliders that we have as well. We have, and we want to think about polygon colliders, which are like mesh colliders, and there's also box colliders. Box colliders are the easiest to do, right? So let's add in a box collider. Now you might think this is too crazy, but actually when you think about what we're doing, it adds it in nicely, right? It creates an area that is just big enough to hold everything, so a bounding box. And then you got to think to yourself, what do we want to do, right? So am I going to rotate the head right now? Chances are not, right? And notice the robot, it's all one. It's not like the head and the arms are separate right now. So we're going to just use a box collider. That's probably the best collider. That's why I said don't get the robot to, kind of get the collider, because it'll create a mesh collider and it'll be too complex. So on that, let's, on the overrides, let's apply all. So all robots now have a box collider. It looks like this. Okay, not bad. Box collider first. So that's the robot. Let's save. All right. And what I want to do here with this one, first of all, we can get rid of the tutorial info folder. Let's get rid of that. We don't need that folder anymore. Goodbye. And we don't need the README file we had here before. So that's going to kind of lighten up the project a little bit. And what I want to do with the robot is add some information to it in a bit. But right now, I just want to delete it. Let's get rid of the robot. We've already made it in a prefab. Here's the robot. We can always get back to it. Now, what I want to do is I want to create a walkable area, right? That is a nav mesh. Okay, that's what I want to do. So nav meshes are a great way of adding simple AI to a game, and especially for testing. It may not be exactly what you want to do at the end, the end. But notice on AI, I can go to navigation, right? From a navigation perspective, it'll bring up the navigation window. What I want to do is, if I go into my tiles, I have these 4 tiles. Here are my 4 tiles. And notice what it says is, I want to make there's some options here, right? One of them is agents. I can talk about how big the agents are. So here's my height. Here's my step height. Here's my maximum slope. Are they humanoid or not? Ours are. And what is the radius, right? The radius. Okay. So this is important. We can make as many agents as we want, right? So we can make a new one here. And the new agent, we'll call it robot, right? So that's what we'll name it down here. So this is the robot agent. And to size our robot agent, we're going to do that later. But for now, let's just add a robot agent. And we don't have to, we don't have a humanoid. We can't remove the humanoid, but we can add our own custom robot, right? And we'll discuss some of these features, how wide it's going to be. You're going to go to Window, AI, Navigation. That's what you're going to do. DaVinci. Window, AI, Navigation. And you're going to say, wait, we don't handle like AI until later. And you're right, we don't. But this isn't really AI. This is just like a very basic way of testing our platform and everything else and getting our robot to see if he's right. So an object, there's a couple things. We can bake. It says bake, right? And that's the Nav Mesh bake settings. And it talks about the agent size. Depending on the agent size that we're going to use, right? We can talk about things like the minimum region area. We can talk about a lot of stuff, the height mesh and so on. We can also look at areas of walkable, not walkable, and jumping. We can make new areas for ourselves, right? And for example, I can make an area that's difficult terrain if I want to. But first, we want to select the objects. And notice we say that we have tile 1 and 3 others. We want to create a static navigation mesh that is all walkable. Okay, that's what we want. And if I do that, right, that's the first part. So I'm kind of selecting these objects as walkable areas. It talks about the mesh renderers. So these are the objects themselves that we can access. And I don't want to generate off mesh links. Okay, I don't need that. But if you go to bake, where it says bake, and if for now, what you can do is you can just bake with these settings. Click bake. And what you're going to see is you're going to see areas that are on the ground that are these blue colors. Okay? Areas that are blue, like so. We're going to modify this because we're going to go back to agents. And we're going to say that the robot, right, they're pretty wide, these guys, these robots, right? The robots have a radius of 1.5, right? Because they're like pretty wide, right? Like really wide, like this. Height is about 2. And the way to test this, by the way, if you want to test the size of your robot or whatever, bring your robot back in. Don't worry about this for now. We can come back to this. So bring your robot back in, right? And then install a, take a look at the inspector. And the inspector, we can see that, some information about his scale, right? So it's 180/80. That doesn't tell us much. Let's bring in a cylinder and compare them. So let's bring in a cylinder. So I want to make a brand new 3D object like we did last week, cylinder. And let's bring them up. And the great thing about measuring with a cylinder, it's like a measuring stick in some ways. Here's a cylinder. Okay, so the cylinder, just to give you a sense of the size of our robot that we made, right? If you wanted to make it this big, that is 0.5 wide, right? And that is 2 meters high. So we can also look at it from a perspective mode, right? With Unity as well. So there's our robot. Tell me then how high the cylinder is. If you notice here that when I look at the cylinder, the scale is about 2 meters. That's the height of the capsule, 2 meters, right? And if I change the height to 3 meters and I don't show the cylinder anymore and move it up, it's more than 3 meters high. Let's go with 4 meters, right? So the capsule, it's kind of hard to see this. And let's move back into perspective mode so you can see it. The capsule is actually more than, it's about 4 meters in height. So let's go with 3 meters again, so see if that works a little better. If we can kind of encapsulate. How about 3.5? 3.5 looks a little better in terms of height. So it looks like our little guy is not so little, right? Again, I'm adjusting for the size of my model. So height-wise, we're looking at about 3.25 meters, right? Can you get it from the box collider dimensions? Absolutely, but we're just sizing it by eye here, right? So we can see that, and if I look at it from orthographic view, right, which is what it is, it's actually bigger. It's more like 3.5, right? So that's really what it is, because I'm looking at right from orthographic view. It's hard to see from where it is. So 3.5 meters tall, right? And we can also use the same cylinder to and rotate it, let's say, across the z-axis, right? Let's say 90 degrees. And then we can see how wide this guy is, right? Like, he's pretty wide, right? So again, instead of 3.5, let's make him so it's like, 3 wide. It's like a brick, right? Look at that. It's about 3 meters wide, I would say, and about 3.5 meters tall. All right, that's how this thing is, 3 by 3.5. So that's what I've done there, really roughly, right? So if you look at going back to our to what we had before, so let's go back to our robot, and let's go to navigation, right? So really, from a width perspective, that's cool, but our height is like 3.5 meters high. That is our robot right now, the way we made him. Okay, that's what we've done. And like was said in the chat, Michael's saying, hey, can I calculate it in a different way? Absolutely. But that is the amount of room I need to pass this robot the way it is. I cannot move in shorter intervals than 1.5 and 3.5. That means that when I bake my mesh, I can rebake it, okay? I can rebake it. First, I gotta select all of it again. And agent radius is not 0.5, but rather 1.5. And the height is 3.5, okay? And if I was to do this and click bake, you're gonna see some areas that are not walkable anymore. Take a look. So even this area here is like barely walkable. The areas that are in blue are the areas that are walkable. But see how this cannot connect to this one? Because our robot is really massive. right? Same thing, at least for our geometry. Take a look. So it's like I don't have complete walkable areas for everything that I want to do. I don't have that, right? And that's using the same size as a robot. So it looks to me, either we make our maze bigger, right? Or we make our robot smaller to navigate through the maze. All right, so don't worry about the tiles. We can always redo it. Let's go back to our robot and think about them for a second. So it's pretty tall, 3.5 meters tall, right? And that's okay. It's his height, it's his width. That's the big problem. So the scale on the X and Y is 80 and 80. Let's reduce that scale even more. So something like, 60 and 60. All right, so that's kind of something that we're going to do. So it's kind of even thinner than what we thought before. Okay. Height's not an issue, right? Height's not really an issue. It's the width. That's the problem. So again, if I was to scale that width with a capsule of some kind, right? So let's do the capsule again. Again, I was pretty quick to get rid of it, but it's okay because we can get it back pretty quickly. It's just for scaling really quickly, right? Because instead of having a script and all that stuff, because the script will tell us everything, right? Remember that the capsule is roughly 2 meters in height, right? So again, if we were to rotate the capsule across the y-axis by 90 degrees, or sorry, let's try that again. Then you can clearly see that this is about 2 meters wide now. So we've kind of cut down to about 2 meters wide, right? That's how wide this dude is, okay? About 2 meters wide. And again, it's just rough. We're just kind of measuring roughly what it is. So now that looks a little better, he's a little thinner than he was before. And this will, kind of indicate to me what I'm going to do later on this week, okay? So a little bit thinner. So going back to navigation, we want to make his width about 2 meters. Sorry, agent height 3.5. That stays the same. We didn't change that. But the agent radius goes to 1, which is about 2 meters in diameter, okay? And if I did that and press bake, right now you're going to see the baking area be much more navigatable. Most areas now will be able to fit my guy, right? Some areas like here and like here won't, okay? But again, we're not looking for perfection this time around. All we're looking is for some areas that are safe, and some areas that just won't matter. Okay, cool. So that's this, safe. Now, what I want to do in order for me to make them work is select the robot. Well, first of all, let's fix the agent. The agent size is going to be fixed to 1 radius. So we're going to use that agent as my robot. You're going to see this in a second. And what we want to do for the robot is go back to the inspector and add a new component and start talking about nav. If I go Nav Mesh Agent is what I want to add in. Nav Mesh Agent makes it so that it's pretty big. Look at that. So it tells you the width of my object. That is a kind of an indicator for you of, and by the way, I can change agent types. If I go to Humanoid, you can see that it'll be a different Nav Mesh Agent than before, right? So I want to go robot, right? That's the first thing. And so the radius talks about what the radius is, the height, it talks about the height is, and so on, right? And I can talk about the quality and so on, but see how big this is? Would this be the radius, right? So take a look at that. I can make the radius come close as possible, right? So 0.03. And why? Because of these numbers here, the scale of the object, right? So 0.01, right? And that looks about right. So 0.01 is probably close to where we want our radius to be, right? Height-wise, that's a different thing. The height needs adjustment. So if I do this with the height, you can see that the height goes a lot bigger, right? And we want to move that to 0.04, let's say, or 0.45. And we can make, we can adjust it as well because it's off the ground. and all that stuff. But usually around 0.43 or something like that might be good. Okay. Now, why is this the way it is? Why is the height like this? And why did we get these weird numbers? And here's the base offset, right? Notice that the base offset moves it this way. Undo. Because of this, because when we took it out of Blender, we could have adjusted everything differently, and we didn't. And that's why it's the way it is. We have these weird numbers. Not to worry, we're going to make this work. So now that the agent is in place, right? Now that we have a Nav Mesh Agent, let's add the Nav Mesh Agent to the robot, and we'll apply those changes. We have a Nav Mesh Agent, but still, if I was to run this thing, it's not going to do anything. The robot's not going to move. Let's see how big it is, so you get a sense of how scary it can look. That's how big it is, right? So we're sitting at it and we're going, woo! Okay, let's run away from this guy, right? Now he's not going to chase us right now. He's not chasing us, right? Because it's not enabled. We need an enemy behavior script. Okay, we need a reference to the Nav Mesh Agent. That's what we need. Let's add that in. So scripts, new, C# script. We'll call this enemy behavior. Okay, there's our enemy behavior script. And we'll attach this enemy behavior script just like we did to the other objects. So on the robot, we can minify this and grab the enemy behavior script and attach it. Here's the enemy behavior. Double click on it. It'll bring up Visual Studio 2019. And then what you want to do with it is you want to expose the Nav Mesh Agent. So you're going to say public nav. If I start talking about Nav Mesh Agent, it's not going to come up. Why? We need to include another library up here. We're going to say using Unity Engine. Come on. .ai. So if we include AI up here, one day when it feels like doing my bidding, hello, then we can go back and, sorry, it's ReSharper doing its thing, starting up. Then I can do a Nav Mesh Agent. Here it is. We can call this the agent, right? And we can say that every frame that the Nav Mesh Agent, and we want it to have a target, right? So it says, notice it says current steering target along the path, right? We can also say that there's a lot of other pieces. So the height, we can change the path, right? And we can also look at other things. So destination is what we want, the destination. And that destination is going to equal to the player's transform. So we can say we need access to the player's transform. So we're going to say that the public transform, and we'll call that the player, right? We need a reference to that as well for our object. And we can make the Nav Mesh Agent something that is part of the, we know it's part of the object itself. We can say that agent is equal to get component and Nav Mesh Agent. So what this is, get component, it's built into mono behavior. And what it does is you can look at a scripts game object and see that it has a Nav Mesh Agent component onto it, like ours does. And then we can say is agent.destination is equal to the player.position, which is what we want. So we want to, every frame, our agent's destination is going to change to match the player's position. That's going to happen on update. Let's see how this works. So save, go back out. And we need to drag and drop the player object onto the Nav Mesh Agent. So again, robot, we're going to go overrides. We're going to add a script, apply. So all robots have that. And the player and the enemy behavior script, it has player, and that's what we need. We need to drag and drop this player on there. There it is. And then if we press play, let's see how this works. It should be able to find, now it says it's got an error, and we can fix this up. It says set destination can only be called on an active agent that has been placed on a Nav Mesh, right? So it's telling us that either the nav mesh isn't created properly. There's our navigation. And what it's saying is that it needs to be put somewhere here and actually touching the nav mesh, something that looks like this. So let's try this out. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to move this over here. And I'm wondering if this is the bottom. That may be bad. We may have to readjust this thing. It might be inside the ground after this. Let's see how this works. If I press play, yeah, it doesn't like that. So let's try and put it on the ground. What would be called an active agent has been placed on a nav mesh. Okay, I thought we did. Yeah. And I believe it's the radius and all that stuff. Let's just do a couple of changes to the Nav Mesh Agent just for now, just to make it work. So under the Nav Mesh Agent, we're using robot. If I use humanoid, or if I open agent settings, this is the agent settings right here. This is the stuff we talked about before. So that's robot, that's humanoid. So notice that robot is here. And for robot, we have our height and our step and our radius, right? Notice that that is the height of the robot, and that's what's happening. And I'm wondering if I have to rebake some of this stuff here. I don't think so, because it's based off the height and the radius of the agent. I think that's all that needs to be done. But I have a feeling that the agent itself is a little bit, it's a little bit too tall, too big. Let's see if I actually touch the ground. Will that make it different if I press play? No, it doesn't like that. Failed to create because it is not close enough to nav mesh. All right, so just to test it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same component. Let's get rid of the robot for now so we can see what the problems are. So troubleshooting, right? Bring in a cylinder or something like that. So let's bring in something that's simple. So again, I'm just going to bring in a 3D object, which is a cylinder. Yes. And make sure, it's because of the scale, that's okay. I can deal with it. Make sure that the Nav Mesh Agent is applied to it. So let's add a Nav Mesh Agent. Just curious. Make a humanoid this time around. And we'll bake our navigation for larger, right? And let's apply the enemy behavior onto it. So hide the capsule collider, and we can just bake the enemy behavior on it. There we go. We get a player, that's the destination, and play. Let's see how this works. All right, that's what I was hoping. So now you can see how it moves to us, right? That's how it should work. Okay. And if I was going to go to the Nav Mesh Agent and move from humanoid to robot, let's see if that works any differently. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to get rid of the mesh renderer so we can see what the Nav Mesh Agent looks like underneath it, because this is the Nav Mesh Agent, right? Robot. And I'm just curious to see what the radius is. The radius looks like it's 0.5, and it shouldn't be. It should be like 1. So 1 should be like that. Yeah, that's more like it, because that's kind of the height. And the height of the robot is like 3.5. So this is an example of what the robot would be like if I was going to move it around. Okay. And the great thing about this, I can just take this Nav Mesh Agent as is and bring it in to the robot. I can also do it where I even have my robot and I make a separate object that represents the Nav Mesh Agent. Yeah. So if I try doing that, let's see what it does now. Set destination can only be called an active agent that is placed on a nav mesh. So that's what I'm saying. I want to just try and make it so that it works. So let's bring it closer. And let's bring our cylinder, the actual cylinder object, up a little bit. And that's the capsule collider, right? Let's just take the capsule collider off for now. We don't care about the capsule collider. All I care about is the actual object itself. I'm just curious if what the issue is, because that should work. Doesn't like it. Let's go with what you said. Let's change the robot to a humanoid and then try that out. Okay, so that's works. So that testing that, I know what to do. So like you said, robot humanoid looks better. Let's bring in my model again. And let's just change the Nav Mesh Agent. So it went away again, that's fine. But let's bring that in. So let's go into Nav Mesh Agent. Let's use a humanoid instead. We'll change it from 3.5. Let's bring that over there. Make it a little bit more narrow because that seems to be pretty big. Oh yeah, the robot, of course, got the wrong robot. Let's delete that robot and bring in the actual robot. Now, how about the real robot? Well, the real robots, please stand up. Thank you very much. And let's change this to humanoid. Humanoid, that's good. And the speed is 3.5. Angular speed is this. Quality is high. Radius is 0.1. Height is 0.43. And let's see if that works any better. Like you said, let's see if that works. So the player transform needs to be selected. And let's apply the changes. Apply. Okay, and play. See if that works any better or if it works worse. Okay, so cool. So there he is. And look what the robot does. The robot kind of hunts you that way. Ah! So why did it do that? Why did it flip over like that? And this is going back to what we talked about, right? And the reason why it flips over this way is because of the rotation that we've got here going on, right? The rotation of the robot is minus 90, right? So it's going to try and rotate the robot to where it's supposed to be, right? So this is the issue. So again, things that we could do. We could make a cylinder that surrounds the robot. Doesn't matter what the actual robot looks like, right? We can make a container for it. So like this, let's suppose I make a container, hear me out, right? And let's make an empty, create an empty parent. Here's the empty parent, right? And instead of my robot, who cares what my robot looks like? I can remove the component from my nav mesh and remove the script. And then I can, and the empty object, I can call this the robot, right? And then the inner object, that will be called the robot body for now, watch. And then the robot itself can have the nav mesh, right? As well as the collider, and I can actually leave the collider where it is. And what I can do is I can also add the components, so the scripts. So let's put that enemy collider there, change that to humanoid, base offset 0, right? And what we want is a radius to be what it is, so 1, right? And a height to be 3.5, right? And that is pretty good, right? The only difference is that the robot itself has the robot body, right, is something that we need to move up, right? Because we can move the robot body relative to this up. So we can say that this is going to move upwards, right? Let's say by 0.64. And again, what you're doing is you're just moving it up so that way it's just below or above that. So I think maybe even more. So something like 0.75. Yeah. Is it within? No, even more. So something like maybe even 1. Let's see what that looks like now. Yeah. Yep. 1. Good. So that's the robot body. That's the robot. I moved it up 1 whole point because it was kind of offset a little bit because of the way we made it. And I think now we're ready to go with this thing. So save and let's try it out and let's run it and see what happens. And if we have to lower it down, we will. Yeah, that's okay. That's a good problem to have. So that's the player body, player. And I'm going to kind of do that, and then we'll save the robot again. And then we can see that the robot now goes at me, but it's going backwards. So that's not a good thing, but we can just realign the robot body so that it's in the right orientation. So we're going to spin it kind of a corkscrew across the y-axis, something like 180 degrees, so it looks the other way, right? And we can save it, and we can save this robot. So let's go back to prefabs and create this as a robot body. There it is, robot body. And let's make sure that that is all the overrides have been applied. Yes, we remove that, and then take this robot, pull that into the object itself. So it's kind of a new prefab. And then what we can do is we can run it, and we can have a robot running around and facing it, right? And it's going to try and knock you down. And no matter where you go, if I go here or whatever, the robot, if it can fit, will try and chase you down. Let's see if it works. So now, let's see if that robot finds me. And it's pretty scary, right? Because it'll find me wherever I am, and it'll crush me until I'm out of there, right? And then I can run away, and I can go here, and I'll try and find a space where it can't possibly fit, like in here, and see what happens. And see if it can get to me. Because there's going to be certain parts of the maze where the robot can't fit, like here. See how it can't fit there? And we can just maybe squeeze by it, or maybe not. I'm stuck. But you kind of see what I'm talking about, right? And I can't push it because the robot will keep on trying to be near me. But that's pretty much how it is. Okay, so that's the robot. So we've added a robot. The robot is the container, and yeah, it does all kinds of stuff like that. So be careful about the nav. If you put a rigid body on a robot on the actual nav mesh, I don't recommend it. All right, so that's how it has to be. So there's your robot. That's pretty cool. And I can add in as many robots as I want now. Let's add 2 of them. Let's add another one in here, right? So there's another robot. And they can be pretty scary customers, right? Because it's like, you know, if you watch how they move, right, as an example, and we can put this robot somewhere else because he's too close. So somewhere like at the other edge of the other end of town, so to speak, right? Let's put him like way over here, right? So he's going to face even the wrong direction, way over here, okay? So that's the one robot. Here's the other robot that's closer. And what we're going to do is we're going to split screen so you can see what's going on with the robots. And we'll kind of look at it from a top-down view in our maze. And then if I run the game, here's our maze down here. Take a look. And it says, okay, so a couple things. It says the enemy behavior has not been assigned. So that is something that's a problem. And it looks like it needs to be overridden. So that's something that needs to be applied, right? Because the player transform has to be on there. And the same thing goes with this one. Player transform is not automatic, which kind of sucks. But that's part of it. We'll talk about how to do that next day. And if I run it, then you're going to see that it should work now. And take a look at what's happening here on the top. So just to give you a sense of it, how they're kind of moving through it. And what's going to happen is they have a pretty good speed, and it's going to turn and everything else. And it's going to get to a point where it fits through there, and it's going to try and push me until I'm off the edge. And same thing with this one. One thing you can do to adjust that is to get close enough, you can adjust the stopping distance. Right now the stopping distance is 0. You can change the stopping distance to something like 1, right? And we can, again, we can go to override, apply all. That's something that can happen. And if I run it one more time, you can see how it's going to stop in front of me, but not on me. So again, we can see that the robot's coming. Take a look at the top. He's coming. He's coming. And let's see if I can, oh man, maybe I can get away from him. Oh, they've got me. They got me. And this guy can't get to me because he's too wide. He's going to slide over and maybe hit me with his arm. Who knows? And if I fall off the world, the robots can't do anything about me. Let's try that again. So that's stopping distance. Stopping distance is pretty cool for a Nav Mesh Agent. We'll talk more about this stuff again. In terms of what we can do, we have a lot of choices, right? We're too late. Oh, crushed by the robots, right? Like we really have to move quick. You can also make them move slower. So again, one thing we don't have is a mini map, right? So we don't have a mini map of what this looks like. And if I was to try and go here, I might be able to evade them for a bit. You can see how they change tactics. And I'm going to get to the point where I'm going to be crushed again. It's too small. Amazing. Oh, somehow I was pushed out of the way. They crushed me, but the colliders pushed me up somehow. Ha ha ha. And you can see where I am now. They're going to try and get to me. And let's say both of them are going to go in the wrong direction. So I can see if I can scoot around here and be trapped. Oh yeah, let's move around them. But what about here? See, I'm going to be trapped. They'd be trapped in there, but they're going to find another way to get to me. So, because they can't go to that little space there, right? So, like this space right here, maybe they can still get to me. There they are. Fun with robots. Questions around Nav Mesh Agent and what we did to fix the problem. With any mesh, you can kind of make it so that the parent doesn't matter. You can align it properly. The reason why this didn't work with the robot is because our robot is rotated at -90. And what it's going to try and do when you have a Nav Mesh agent is it's going to undo these rotations. It's going to try and make sure that they navigate in the right orientation and everything else. So it's far easier just to encapsulate a mesh that we brought in from Blender. And if it's some weird numbers like that, it doesn't matter because we can put it within another game object. And once we do that, we can align it the way we want. All right, so that is that. Couple things to note in terms of lighting quality before we go. So one thing that we talk about in the course shell is the quality, right? So if I go to edit, and this is the last thing we're going to do today, project settings, then you're going to see that under graphics, there's a couple of things that it gives you. And it gives you kind of a low tier graphics, a medium tier graphics, and a high tier graphics, and it talks about the standard shader quality. Okay, so high shader quality and so on. What we're going to explore over the course of the next week's coming is how to improve the quality of the graphics. So quality settings, there's two kind of settings. One is graphics and the other one is quality. Here's the quality as well. And what we don't have is a render pipeline asset, which is okay. Notice that right now, the way we're sitting is we're actually looking at medium settings, right? But however, the desktop version should be using ultra settings. Okay, that's the ultra settings. So if we click on ultra settings, you can see that it uses 4 times multi-sampling. It doesn't use VSync, right? Texture quality is full res, right? Which is pretty cool. Texture streaming, no. Soft particles, yes. Distance shadow mask. And a hard and soft shadows, high resolution from a shadow resolution perspective. And it says something like a shadow distance of 150. These are all great settings for desktop. But when it comes to, mobile, like take a look at the mobile settings. If I was to go to medium, right, which is something that you can see that they're a lot lower. And those quality settings are the things that we're going to be working with over the next couple of weeks. All right, so questions are, where did I put the where I put the box collider? The box collider is still on the robot body. So if I was going to go into the robot body, you can see the box collider is still there, right? And every box, so the robot body, it's easy for us to put it around the robot body because it has a particular shape. We could also put it on the outside if you really want to, but I recommend putting it on the inside, the actual robot body itself. Okay, so that is your lab. So for submission for this week, and I want to talk about, for the people who need it, if you can stick around, I want to talk about UI one more in a second or so. Okay, so we've made a simple, and this is not part of the lab. This is just like a UI review for people that need it. It's literally a few minutes to do. Okay, one thing we've talked about so far is a single scene, right? And we can go with multiple scenes, right? So I'm going to save, file, save. First, let's do this first. File, save project. Let's exit from Unity, put it up on GitHub for those people who need to go, right? Who are or done their lab basically, right? So let's just do changes, stage all changes. And then what I'll say is added simple Nav Mesh Agent and Nav Mesh, which is what we did, right? Commit files, and we're going to push them to GitHub. So you'll have all those changes. So you can compare my project, download my project, see what it looks like, and compare my project to your project for the lab. Enemy behavior update. Yeah, the reason why is because you don't have a reference to your, in here, you have to get a reference to your player transform. So when we launch Unity again, that's why it's super important to make that reference. Yeah, and the reason why that might happen is in the game when you drag in a player, sometimes what happens is it gets disconnected. Like if your player is somehow I don't know, leaves the game or comes into the game after, then that's when bad things can happen. So that's when you can get those weird settings, those weird errors, because the reason why you get that problem is if you don't have a reference. So somehow, let's suppose that if I press play, and if you look at the robot one, if robot one doesn't show a player transform here, like it doesn't show it here, you should check that. Check it for both robots, right? And you can pause the game. You don't have to make it so it goes. Check it for both robots when you run 1 and 2. Does it have a player transform? If it doesn't have a player transform listed here, then either you haven't dragged and dropped the player in there, or you know, something else has gone wrong. Okay, now let's talk about making a new scene. So for those people who've done it before, you can go. For people who didn't, okay, it's probably got disconnected somehow. And what I mean by that is it's either off the nav mesh. Somehow you're not on the nav mesh when it starts. So for example, if the player itself is not on a nav mesh area, right? So notice my player. If I go back to my player, here's my player, and look at my nav mesh. I'm on the nav mesh area. If I'm not on my nav mesh area, it's going to give me an error. That's also an issue. You have to be on the nav mesh when you start so they know where to go. Okay? The player itself has to be positioned there. All right, let's get into that other part. So let's suppose that I want to make a new scene. I want to call the start scene. So I'm recording this for people. So, you know, if you have to go, I understand. So I'm going to create a new scene, right? So here it is. And let's call this the start scene. Okay. So the start scene is where I'm going to go. And I want to make a simple menu on the start scene. Remember that the menus are all 2D, right? So here in the start scene, we don't need much of anything except for a couple of UI elements. And we can start off by adding in a button. So let's add a new UI element. And for now, we're just going to make simple buttons. So let's make a really simple, you know, Text Mesh Pro button. Okay, that's what we're going to add in. Notice that Text Mesh Pro is what we need. And as soon as I do that, it's going to say import TMP essentials. Do that. In Unity 2021.2, you need to use Text Mesh Pro. All right, so cool. So there's a button. Let's take a look at the canvas. So the canvas is I guess a way of an abstraction of what the you know, the scene is going to look like. One thing we want to do is want to go into 2D. In the menu, we always want to be in 2D anyway. We don't want to be in 3D, at least when we're planning the menu. We want to put the button where it's supposed to go. So again, what I want to do is, the buttons are a little bit different than other things in that buttons have a rect transform instead of a regular transform. So the rect transform allows us to, if I press the Alt key, it actually allows me to center items by pressing the Alt key and pressing the middle, wherever I want the item to be. If I want to be at the bottom, I can put the item wherever I want. Okay, that's the first thing. So I want the button for now to start in the middle of the screen. This is where it's going to be, right? So then I can kind of pull it down so it's not quite in the middle. The other thing is that all items in a canvas have something called a anchor. And right now the button anchor is in the middle of the screen. You can put that anchor anywhere you want. We're going to talk about that later on. So let's call this button what it's going to be. We'll call this the start button. And what we're going to do here in the start button is let's change the text. So inside the start button, there is a text item, which we can call start, right? And we can make that text item as big as we want. We can make it so that it's like 40 big, right? Or we can make it auto size, which is kind of the better way to do it. Auto sized, right? Then we can make the button as tall as I want. There's little control handles next to the button. This one is a great one to use, where I can kind of change the size of my text or the size of my button. So if I make this button really, really big, right? So the button is massive. I can do that. And also inside of it, right, as an example, I can make the auto size option. The minimum would be something like 20, and the maximum is going to be 40. Why is that not working? There it is, maximum 40, minimum 20, right? And you can see how that kind of works out. I can make it actually bigger. I can make the maximum 60 if I want. And you can see it's a massive button, and it's probably too big. So I can kind of rescale the button the way I want. Again, I don't want to click on the text, but rather the start button itself, the actual button. And then I can resize the button to make it the size that I want it to be, something like that. And then again, I can, if I moved it around like I just did, I can go back to this and press Alt and then center, and I can recenter it. So I can move it around just like that. And once I have a button, one thing to note is the camera is weird because it gives me a skybox. Who cares about the skybox? I'm going to use a solid color. So you can choose from a camera, solid color, right? And let's make it so that the solid color is something like a gray color, right, for the button. So you see what the game would look like is something that looks like this. I can also put the button inside of a some kind of panel. That's also very common. And the panel by default, it is stretched. We don't want to make the panel stretch. We want to use the kind of the middle anchor as well. And what I can do with the panel, it's kind of like, it could act like a container. So I can kind of go to the panel and I can use these keys to kind of scale the panel in to make it look like what I want it to look like, something like that. Sure. And again, what I can do is I can move the panel so that it is with Alt key, it's in the middle, direct middle of the screen. There we go. And I can put the button inside the panel. So kind of make it look like that. So you can see that that's where it is, right? And if I look at the game, you can see that the game actually looks kind of like this, where I have the start button and the panel. The panel can be as wide as you want it to be, kind of the size of the screen if you want. I'm just making the panel smaller so you can see how that works. Let's add another label to the panel. I can just right click on the panel and go UI, and I want to add a text object, right, which is our label. Again, we want that label. A lot of times when we make a label, we want it to be auto sized, right? And we also want the label to be centered, right? As well as centered. And then we can do the same thing with the label is got the anchor that's in the center, but we can use the Alt key to kind of put it in the center. We can also change the label so that it's meaningful. So we can say like, welcome to our game. Call this the welcome label. And then in the text for the label itself, it's got a text property. We can change the label's text property to like welcome, right? There we go. So it's welcome, right? And it's not pretty right now, but who cares? Because this is just a demo. And so what we're looking for is, let's see if there's a way of pressing the button and making us go to the next scene. And so the way to do that is you're going to go to scripts and you're going to add a new script. We'll call this UI controls, the script. So how about we do that again? Oh, let's refresh, because that is really bizarre. Sometimes it does that where we've already added a script, but did I add it in? I did. I thought I did. That's weird. Okay, well, let's add it in. I don't think it's here. So let's go to scripts, new C# script, and we'll say, call this UI controls, the UI control script. And we can attach it to the canvas or something else. A lot of times what I like to do is make an empty object that I can attach it to. So again, I can right click and go create empty. And this will be kind of like the menu controller. And in the menu controller, I can drag in the UI controls script. There we are. Make sure that the empty objects are reset to the middle. And what I can do with the UI controls is I can program them so that when I might go to the button, I can use some kind of script in the UI controls that does something. Let's go into UI controls and show you, and then we'll be done for the day. So using Unity Engine scene management is what we want to add. So we want to modify our scene. And what I want to do is I want to create a brand new public void function called on start button pressed. And the start button pressed is going to call the scene. So we're going to say something like, hey, scene manager, I want to load scene. And I want to load scene the main scene. And we can't do that yet because we have to modify the scene. But for now, we don't need any of this. All we need is just, kind of UI controls. So on start and button press is the only thing we need in there. Now, in order for me to do any kind of scene changes, and again, I'm going to go over this again, I need to add it to the build settings. So again, I'm going to go to File, Build Settings, and notice that there's no scenes to build. I can add open scenes, which is the start scene, and then I can go to scenes and drag and drop the main scene in there. So you have to have start and main inside there. Notice they also have a scene number, 0 and 1. So kind of cool. So start scene is 0, the main scene is 1, and I can save the game. And then when I go back to the script, let's go back to the script. Main makes sense. Scene manager, load scene main. When I press the on start button pressed. When I use the on start button pressed event, that's how it works. How do I connect this to the button? Well, I got to go back to the button. And the button itself has here's an example of what the button looks like. The button itself has an on-click area. And I can just I can add a new event to it by clicking this plus button. And then inside there, I can drag and drop the menu controller onto that button, the whole menu controller. And I can select the function. I can go to UI controls, and I can select the on start and button pressed event. And so that is the process. And I'll go over it in a second when I'm done. So this is how it works. So once I've done this, then if I save the scene and press play, then it should start with the start scene. And when I click start, it should take me to the main scene. Right, and there's these guys chasing me again. Maybe I can outrun them. Maybe not, because they're gonna find me. They found me. I don't know how, but they found me. Right? All right. These guys are gonna kill me. So how did I do that? Let's go over it one more time. I'm gonna save my project too, and I'll put this up on GitHub. How did I do that? Well, a couple things, right? So the button itself, first of all, is layout. The first part of making any user interface is all review for the people that have already done it with me, who are people who are gaming students, right? But if you're not a gaming student, that's okay. Your first thing you add is you can add a panel first or the button first. Doesn't really matter, but you need to add some UI elements. The most important one out of all of them is the button. When I add an element and it'll ask you for the first time, do you want to install Text Mesh Pro? And we did. That is another package that gets installed and allows you to use the new packages for Unity, the Text Mesh Pro packages. That's number one. And then after you've done the button, you need some kind of script to enable the button's click event, right? Because the button itself, start button, if you scroll down, all buttons have this on-click event area. I click the plus button. Listen, let me show you from scratch. So I click the plus button. It gives me an empty area. And the menu controller just so happens to have the UI controls attached to it. The most erroneous thing people do is they think that from the start button, they can drag and drop the script. They can go here and try and drag and drop the UI control script. That won't work. Notice that it says monoscript. It doesn't work like if you do this way. You can't just make a script and drag it into the button. What you need to do is drag an object that has that script onto the button. So that's what I did with the menu controller. The menu controller has a UI control script, which is like literally one function. And I need to go to the start button and I need to drag in the menu controller in there on top of the button. Then under the function, it gives you several options, right? The game object functions, the transform functions, as well as UI controls. UI controls is the custom script, and I can select the on start button press function that I made. Once I have that, then everything is set up properly because the on start button pressed event allows me to use the scene manager to load the main scene. And again, in order for me to get the scene manager, I have to enable unity.scene management. Those are the dependencies. Now, the biggest problem is, and people fail to do this too, is file build settings. Build settings, you must have the scenes listed here in order for you to be able to switch scenes. If you don't have this, switching scenes is impossible. Okay, so that's the way to do it. So if I had an end scene and I wanted to go there if I got touched by an enemy, right? Then first I create the end scene, right? And then when I'm inside of the play scene, the main scene, if I get touched by an enemy, I would scene management load scene, and I would go to the next scene. I would go to the end scene, and it would say game over. You got touched by the enemy or whatever, right? And we'll do that again. But this should give you a sense of how to build a simple UI which will satisfy some of the requirements. Of course, this is really ugly. You can make it beautiful. And there's some great tutorials on how to do a Unity UI online that make it even nicer than this. You can download assets. Like here, I've just used basic assets through the Unity engine, but you can certainly download assets that look way nicer than this. Okay. Questions around Unity UI for those people who've never done it before? Any questions around how I put it together and how it works? I'll put this up on GitHub in a second. You can always download the project and check it out. This is not part of your lab. Anybody? Are you guys okay then? Everybody? Joshua, are you good now? Okay, Mook said the same snake. Audrey says, I would say 5 minutes max, Audrey. I don't think I would go more than 5 minutes. I would try and target 5 minutes for your level. Like total playtime. Okay, good. Hey, I'm really glad that you did that, though. Lots really great learnings, Joshua. I think that the most amazing part is that when you try and experiment on your own and fail, right? To be honest. Yeah, I could do that for you, Nandini, no problem. I mean, you could totally do that way too, but then the reusability is low, right? Like this way you can have one script that has all of them, and we'll talk about that as it goes, right? So, all right, so that's it for me today. I'm going to stop recording this. Hopefully that it helped you. I'm going to end stream, and then we'll hook back. Yeah, Jerome, talk to me.
Okay, so